And now, it's time for your Low Country Real Estate Market Update.
Good morning, Charleston, and welcome to another edition of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show here on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA. Today, we are going to go through our predictions for the 2025 housing market. What's going to happen with supply, with interest rates, with pricing? We're going to cover it on a national level, and then we're going to relate that to what's happening here in Charleston, South Carolina, so that you can be an informed consumer. If you're thinking of buying, selling, investing in real estate, or you just like to stay up to date on the market, this is the show for you, and we're going to cover a lot of ground. And to help me do that, because interest rates and affordability are such an important part of the equation, I've brought in my local expert, Derek Goulette of Fairway Mortgage, so that we can have that discussion from your perspective. I can obviously touch on it, but you're the expert, so we're going to have a lot of questions for you today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, so just before we get into it, I want to just very quickly get some contact information out there so that if anybody's listening and thinking, you know, that guy really knows his stuff like I know you do, they can reach out to you. So what's the best way for somebody to get in touch with you real quick?
Typically, it's cell phone, and that number is 949-280-8044. Call me or text me.
Right on. All right, so let's get into it because this show is really all about not only where we've been, which we covered last episode, but what we see happening this year. What are some of the trends that people need to be aware of, and how can they incorporate that into their plan, into that decision-making process? So I think in order for us to really understand kind of where we're going, let's just take a really quick trip down memory lane. And from your perspective, kind of, I guess, explain what you saw happening last year, and I guess why a lot of folks either made the decision or were forced into the decision to not buy a house last year.
Perfect. So as far as where we were last year and kind of maybe where we're going, what I would say is we had massive fluctuations in rates throughout the most of the year, and they gradually ticked down, although not in any linear fashion. So leading up to the big Federal Reserve cut back in October of 50 basis points, we saw rates coming down heading into that. And then ever since then, we've actually seen rates rise. And so you had a lot of people sitting on the sidelines in anticipation of long-term rates coming down that never actually came down. So they just kind of sat. They also sat because of the election. They wanted to know one way or the other which direction we were going to go.
Absolutely. And it's been a weird past few months for our market, kind of as a result of that. Obviously, we had the election, then we had the holidays, on top of it being an already somewhat slow market. And, you know, we hear all the time folks saying, well, we're going to wait for interest rates to come down before we buy a house. I'm curious from your perspective, this is kind of a sidebar, but I'm curious how you think through that comment that so many buyers make.
Well, I start with trying to understand why they think that waiting is a better option. So is it because they don't want a monthly payment of X, or is it because they think that prices are going to come down in accordance with rates? And so understanding the psychological aspect of, hey, this is why we're waiting, and then you can lead people down the path of making an informed decision about their particular circumstance. You know, maybe they have a house now that they've gained a ton of equity on, and yes, their payment's going to go up, but, you know, maybe it transitions them from the house that they kind of like to the house that they love. And their fear of rates keeps them from moving forward when you can then present them with the facts and figures and data to make an informed decision to help them bridge that gap.
Right. Maybe quickly explain how the Federal Reserve is tied into, you know, your typical 30-year fixed mortgage rates. Because everybody's following the Federal Reserve, right? It's become this addiction of sorts where they're waiting for those points to get cut. They anticipate that 30-year fixed mortgage rates are going to fall in line with that. Maybe help educate folks for just a moment on how those two are somewhat connected, but not really, and the role of Federal Reserve in all this.
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve just really determines what we call monetary or money policy across the United States. And so the interest rate that they have is actually the interest rate that they let banks borrow money from them overnight to meet deposit requirements, which is a whole bigger, longer conversation. But the short version is that banks need to have a certain amount of their total deposits in cash every night. And so they go to the Federal Reserve to do that. Now, mortgage rates tend to move in conjunction with the direction of the Federal Reserve because mortgage rates are based on the long-term prognosis or prediction for inflation. And when long-term outlook for inflation is coming down, interest rates are coming down. When long-term predictions of inflation are going up, rates are rising. And so when the Federal Reserve starts cutting interest rates, typically that means they think that the prediction for inflation longer term is coming down, which means that rates are coming down. Because you don't want to lend somebody your money today that you know you're not going to get back for 30 total years at a rate if you don't think it's going to exceed inflation. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yep. What do you see happening with rates this year in 2025? I know it's a loaded question. Nobody has a crystal ball. But, in all the conversations we have with folks, you have to remember I have a real estate team. I have a property management team. We've got a private money lending company. We have a lot of conversations on a daily, weekly, monthly basis with folks about their plan to buy, sell, invest, have their properties managed, whatever. And the total amount of people that are hinging their decision on interest rates being a half a point lower, a full percentage point lower is pretty astronomical. There was a study that was done recently by, I think, bankrate.com that said that just a 1% fluctuation in interest rates downward means like an additional 1/3 of all people would be more motivated to buy a house or something like that. I'll have to look at the graph. We can put it on the video. We can superimpose it. But where do you see things kind of heading in 2025 if we're getting to the prediction part of it?
Well, so I'm going to say a couple things about that. So not only is it 1/3 more people, but it also opens up the buyer pool to 5 million additional buyers.
Right.
So, and then I'm going to backtrack for a second. So where are rates heading? I always like to make the following joke. They're heading up and down, but not at the same time. And so, because that's exactly accurate.
Yep.
I think overall, the end of the year will be better than the beginning of the year as far as rates are concerned, whether that's a half, 3/4, or 1 full percent over where they're at today. I don't know. But as you said, even a 0.5% is a massive swing. But, speaking of that, I've got a few examples. So, there are some strategies that we can take advantage of today that can bridge that gap from where we're at today to where we think they might be going. And so there's these things in the marketplace called temporary interest rate buydowns. And so let's just say today's interest rate is 7% for the purpose of our conversation. For the first as little as 12 months, you can have an effective interest rate of 6%. Well, if you look at what that does, for the first 4 years of that loan, you're actually better off than if you took and used those same amount of points to buy down the rate permanently. And so it gives somebody a 4-year window of a total cash out of your pocket for the next, again, 3 to 4 years versus what they could get if they use that same amount of money towards points and discount today. So that's one strategy. And then the other thing to kind of bring up and talk about with them is, what's their equity gain? You and I were talking off air beforehand a little bit about, here's an example, couple buying a house today, and over the next 3 years, they're set to gain $60,000 just based on historical appreciation between equity paydown and equity gain. 5 years from now, it's $97,000. That's real wealth that these people are now getting to participate in by not making the decision to wait.
Right. And you bring up a really good point because, we talk a lot about how to negotiate effectively in real estate on this show. In fact, I wrote a guide really on the seller side, which is why I'm glad you're here talking about this now. I wrote a, almost 50-page guide on everything someone needs to know about selling a house in Charleston. It's the most comprehensive home seller guide in Charleston. If you want to get your hands on that, by the way, text the word guide to 843-800-0065. Text the word guide to 843-800-0065, and I'll send you a copy of that. But when we talk about negotiating on a house to purchase, right, we've got to look at the whole package.
Yep.
If you're getting a mortgage and you're competing against somebody that's paying cash, the purchase price and the way in which they pay for the property is just one part of the overall package of the offer. Maybe they don't want to sell their home in the next 10 to 15 days like so many cash buyers want to do. You know, they want to move quickly because they think that's an incentive to the seller. Well, not to every seller. Maybe they haven't figured out where they're going to go yet, or maybe they need to go and put a home under contract. So we've got all these different elements that we have to factor in when presenting an offer to a seller. And I really want to focus on the point that you made just a little bit ago about the impact on the monthly payment and the savings associated with that, as opposed to taking that same amount of money away from the seller by just negotiating something like the price, right? So I guess just maybe expand a little bit on the difference between negotiating somebody off of their asking price, or getting them to pay your closing costs, or getting them to provide you with a lower temporary interest rate, whether that's for a year or 2 years or 3 years. You know, you've got the 2-1 rate buy downs, all that good stuff. Just curious to hear how you walk through that with somebody thinking about making an offer on a house, and the benefits of both of all.
Yep. That's a really good question, and it's a conversation I have with a lot of people. So if you think about buying a house, there's basically 3 elements of getting to the closing table when it comes to the financing. There's your loan amount, there's your down payment, and there's your closing costs. Typically, the average buyer in Charleston is financing between 90 and 95% of every purchase price. So when you think about closing costs, though, those are always dollar for dollar. So if you're not building them into the purchase price, you are dollar for dollar cash out of pocket for those items. Whereas if you raise your price, let's just say on a $500,000 house, your closing costs are $10,000. So if instead of you offering the seller $490,000, you offered them $500,000 with $10,000, that $10,000 delta at 95% financing means you only brought in an extra $500. Your payment is only about $70 a month different, but you got to hang on to $10,000 of your own money. Or if you didn't have the $10,000, the seller covered it in the form of their contribution towards your closing costs. And so it's a math equation. You balance payment with cash to close. And then within that $10,000, you can allocate it to the best benefit of the consumer. You know, maybe we use part of it for that temporary buy down. But what we do is we just lay the numbers out for the customer and let them make the right decision for themselves. And then you walk them through what the payment difference is if they put $10,000, if they beat the seller up on price for $10,000 versus if they use that $10,000 in seller concessions.
Right. And, one thing that's important to mention is that I think sometimes buyers are concerned that, well, I don't want to overpay for the property, right? I want my savings and I want my cash to be saved by allowing the seller to pay my closing costs, or over time through a lower interest rate, but I don't want to overpay for the property. I don't want to overinflate the value of the property in order to account for that. Well, guess what? You're protected by an appraisal.
Yep.
Which is the beautiful thing.
Yeah. So
it's almost like if you get the seller to contribute toward closing costs and or some sort of interest rate buy down, and the property still appraises, you've really won.
Yeah. And we're actually having probably half of our houses over appraise.
True.
Which is another strategy. If you didn't get closing costs and your house over appraises, you can actually go back and renegotiate that purchase price and include the closing costs.
Yeah.
So
little things that people don't really know, or just they most folks have done maybe a few real estate based transactions in their lifetime.
1 to 3.
Yeah. And it's always changing, which is why we try to help people stay so up to date with market trends and then, strategies like this. So that's fantastic. I want to keep you on for just a little bit more because I have a few more questions I want to ask.
Absolutely.
But give out your contact info again for folks.
Yeah. Derek Goulette, 949-280-8044.
Right on. And of course, if you guys want to reach out to me, you have questions about the real estate market, you're thinking of buying, selling, or investing in real estate, or you have a property you'd like for us to manage for you, our website, listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or give us a call, 843-800-0065. Derek Goulette still joining us. We've got a few more things to discuss about the future of the real estate market here in Charleston. If you're thinking of making a move this year, you're thinking of selling, buying, investing, or you just like to stay up to date with what's going on in the market, this is the show for you. This is the one to watch. If you missed it, we've got it in podcast form on iTunes and Spotify and Google Play. Of course, I video myself and our guests as we're in the studio here. We put all that on YouTube and anywhere you want to look, really. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. But check us out online if you missed any part of this show. So, Derek, I want to get back into our discussion because really at the end of the day, people believe that interest rates are coming down this year, right? Yeah. Every sign is kind of pointing toward that happening. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Correct.
And there are two opinions, two schools of thought on this almost as to what is going to happen when that happens. Either prices are going to go up or prices are going to basically stay flat or maybe even come down a little bit. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this as somebody that's obviously involved in the same transaction, but from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Because, your conversations with your clients are all about the money.
Yeah.
Of course, ours are too, to an extent, but I'm curious to hear kind of your opinion on if and when rates come down, how you see that impacting our market locally.
So, I think that not to oversimplify it, but prices going up or down is a function of demand in conjunction with supply. And so as demand rises, prices will rise unless supply just goes through the roof, which we don't have that luxury here. It's not like all of a sudden we could put 10,000 extra units on the market. And so as affordability, with quotes around it, affordability comes down, demand will go up, which will bolster and buoy prices. That's my opinion, I
think it's pretty simple as well. I think that folks tend to overcomplicate it. And look, I'm not an economist. I'm sure there are plenty of factors that go into this decision, and I've read all about it. And I'm well versed, as are you, which is why you're on the show. At the end of the day, though, I think that there are going to be several factors that cause people to sell their house this year that might not have been there in years past. And one example of that, and I'd love to hear your commentary on this, is think about the folks maybe a year or two ago that were purchasing properties with what we call a 2-1 rate buy down, right? So that means that if interest rates are at 6%, for the first year, it's going to be at 4%, right? 2 percentage points lower. The next year, it's 5%. The third year, it resets to 6%.
Yep.
Well, when lenders got a little slow because 2020 and 2021 were over, right? Yeah. We're just absolutely crazy. And then interest rates went up at the fastest pace in U.S. history, right?
Yep.
You guys started getting creative, as you sometimes do, and saying things like, hey, if you buy a house with me, we'll refinance you for free.
Correct.
Which gave a lot of people hope in this kind of silver lining that, hey, you know what? If you buy this house now at a 6% interest rate, for the first year, it's going to be 4. For the next year, it's going to be 5. And then in the third year, it's going to be 6. So I think a lot of people are at the point now where those interest rates have gone up by a full percent every year and are now at the original rate they locked in at. It's not like prices on anything else have really come down. It's just an expensive environment we're in.
Yep.
Not to mention just locally. It's an expensive place to live.
Yeah.
I anticipate a lot of those sellers, although they have equity, are really uncomfortable with their monthly payment, which will then cause them to make the decision to sell their house. For all the folks that you did that for, do you stay in touch with them? Is there...
Yeah.
Any pulse on that market that you could provide?
So, people fall into two schools of thought in that. They're either starting to freak out a little bit because their payment has risen so much and they were counting on things being lower, especially with every other aspect of life getting more expensive. Or they were fine with whatever that end goal was, end payment was. And they just looked at the first couple of years as like gravy, money in the bank. Somebody else paid for it. And I got the benefit of being able to move into a bigger, better, more expensive house with the lower payment for the first couple of years. And I'm okay with it. And I love my house and it's going to be what it is. But again, you got the people who were counting on things being lower that even though they qualified for it pretty easily from a, cash management perspective, couldn't really afford the higher payment. And those are going to be people that, I probably have half a dozen people now that will become sellers in the next 6 to 12 months just because they don't want to budget and make that higher payment.
And I think that's the tough point. That's just human nature, right?
Yeah.
You look at the extra cash in the bank, it becomes fun money. There's all kinds of books written about this. There's a fantastic book called Profit First. I think you may have read it, but it talks about money management. And the idea is that, if you have a tube of toothpaste, as an example, and you're at the very end of that tube of toothpaste, you're going to do everything in your power to squeeze out that last tiny bit of toothpaste, right? But when you have a full tub, right, you take that sucker out of the box, maybe some of it spills in the sink. Who cares?
Who cares?
You got a full tub.
Yeah.
Right? Full tube. Keep saying tub. If anybody uses a tub of toothpaste, that'd be weird. But anyways, it's the same thing with cash in the bank, right? If you're not allocating your money appropriately and, talks about putting it in a different account, so on and so forth, all you're working with is a full tube of toothpaste at all times, and there's more waste that naturally occurs. I think that folks and the management of their money is going to be a reason why they ultimately decide to sell their house. There are so many people out there that would love to keep their interest rate and move to a new property.
Yep.
And there was talk for a little while last year about the idea of making mortgages transferable.
Portable.
Yep. Thoughts on that?
Oh, that would be a little bit of the Wild West. They do it in parts of Europe. Mm-hmm. I think Canada, Australia, but their banking mechanisms are entirely different than ours. And I don't know that the way that we pool mortgages together, I don't think that it creates a vehicle where that's viable in our marketplace at any time soon.
Yeah. How do you sell that in the secondary mortgage market, I guess is the question.
Yeah. And how do you value it? Because that thing's never getting paid off. Like it's a whole different animal.
Mm-hmm.
So
it'd be like The Big Short, when they start really analyzing the tranches of mortgages that are being packaged together as AAA rated, whatever. Final thoughts from you, Derek, on the future of the market here in Charleston, or really just anything that we didn't touch on that you think is important?
Oh, I think that investing in real estate in general is a fantastic idea. I think that the Charleston marketplace specifically has a lot of really, really positive factors that are going to insulate it from anything that, could come down from a national perspective, short of some catastrophic event. But all in all, we don't have a lot more land to build on unless you go inland. And then you run into other challenges with, logistics of getting to and from different places. But in general, the Charleston market, I think, has a lot of things going for it that insulate it from some of the ebbs and flows that real estate can otherwise experience.
Gotcha. I did think of one more question to ask. When we are selling a house, right? A seller hires us to market their property for sale.
Yep.
I think that agents historically have tried to get away with doing the bare minimum from a marketing perspective in order to get their home sold. And if you think back to 2020, 2021, so on and so forth, you put a sign in the ground and then you literally had a dozen people in your front yard, like bare knuckle boxing over who could get that house first. Right? It was a crazy, totally abnormal time to be selling real estate, of which I've been doing for 20 years. And you've been in the business for
25.
Yeah, just a minute.
Yeah.
Well, now when they have their home on the market, maybe it's not selling, the obvious answer that agents give to a seller as to why their home isn't selling is, well, it's just too high. Just reduce the price. I want to talk for just a moment about offering an incentive to the buyer that kind of coincides with their motivation, which might be a lower payment. People don't buy homes based on purchase price. They buy it based on payment.
Correct.
Of course, if they're getting a mortgage.
Yeah.
So we've talked at length about a seller offering some sort of incentive to a buyer other than just reducing the price, because you reduce the price and then the buyer is more than likely still going to negotiate you on the price.
Yep.
But how do we incentivize them to pay our price by providing them with something in return?
So again, that's where things like temporary buy downs can go a long way. So you can get a temporary buy down that is as big as a 3-2-1. So it takes 3% out of the interest rate for the first 12 months, 2% the next 12, 1% the following. So you actually have 3 years of a payment reduction. I actually helped a buyer negotiate that for one of their properties earlier this year. They were putting a big enough down payment that we could utilize that type of concession. The other thing you can do is actually you can, as a seller, you can lock in a below market interest rate and advertise that through the form of paying for those concessions directly to the lender. But I think that not advertising, because that's the wrong word, but like being able to show the value of the concession to the end buyer and what that does for their payment. Because at the end of the day, you fall in love with the home and then you figure out, how does the payment work?
Right.
And if we can marry those two together earlier on in the process, it creates a happier experience along the way for all parties involved.
Right. Beautiful. Well, one more time, give out your contact info so if folks listening can reach out to you if they'd like.
Yeah, just call me or text me, 949-280-8044. Thanks again for having me, Brian.
Of course. And if you guys want to reach out to me, or if you didn't jot that down in time, you're always welcome to reach out to me, and I'll give you Derek's contact info. My number is 843-800-0065, 843-800-0065, or check us out online, listingsincharleston.com. Big thank you to Derek Goulette of Fairway Mortgage for being on the first half of the show to really help us understand what to expect from a interest rate and affordability perspective this coming year. There's been so much talk about when and if rates will come down and what that will do to not just the national real estate market, of course, but to us here in Charleston. And so the anticipation is that when rates come down, home prices will go up. There might be another run kind of similar to what we saw in 2020, 2021. I don't think it's going to be anything that hectic, but it's something that we need to watch out for and something that obviously we're keeping a very close eye on. Now, if you are thinking of buying a home this year, selling a home, investing in real estate, maybe you have a property you'd like for us to manage for you, we've got some great incentives at the moment. If you'd like to reach out to us, we can share with you all that we offer, whether it's 25% off of our top tier listing program right now, or if you buy and sell a home with us, we will move you for free. All kinds of great incentives. So for more information on that, reach out to us. Listingsincharleston.com is our website, listingsincharleston.com. Or you can give me a call or text. That number is 843-800-0065. That comes straight to me, by the way. That's my personal number, 843-800-0065 or listingsincharleston.com. And don't forget to check us out on YouTube and iTunes and all that great stuff. So let's get right into it. I want to talk about home prices. Okay. We've talked about interest rates. We're going to talk a little bit about supply. But ultimately, what do people really want to know? Are prices going up, down, or staying the same next year? Is property going to be more affordable next year? And if it is, what is that going to do to our market? Well, there are a bunch of different answers for what people believe will happen with home prices next year. Basically, they range from 2 to 4%, right? CoreLogic has it at 2.3% appreciation. Redfin's at 4, Zillow's at 2.6, National Association of Realtors is at 2, they're the lowest, and then Realtor.com is at 3.7. But locally, I think we have to be careful about how we look at this, right? First of all, you've got the difference between the average sales price and the median sales price, right? I like using median because it removes any outliers from the equation. And in Charleston, we have plenty of them. We have homes that sell for, in excess of $10 million, sometimes even more. And so if you look at 2019 as an example, the median sales price in our area was $278,000. Well, in December, right, last month, it was $417,000. That's a 40% jump. But we have to understand the differences in each market, generally speaking, to kind of gain more clarity on those numbers. So I was just pulling some data before this show, and here's where Charleston, Dorchester, and Berkeley County kind of have been and are now. So Charleston County, the median sales price is $581,000. That's up 4% from last year. It's up 8.5% from the year before that, and it's up 43% over the past 5 years. If you look at Dorchester County, their median sales price is $367,000. That was up 3.4% in 2024. It was up 3.3% in 2023, and over the past 5 years, it's been up 34%. In Berkeley County, their median sales price is $395,000, which was up 2.7% in 2024. In 2023, it was actually flat. There wasn't really any appreciation in that market. And over the past 5 years, it's gone up 36%. So when I look at the 5-year appreciation trend last year, prices were up, 50, 60% over a 5-year period. When we did this same show last year, and I kind of did a big market recap, if I'm looking at 2023 numbers, that 5-year appreciation was somewhere between 50 and 60% for one of those three counties. So we've obviously seen a slowdown in appreciation in some areas. Now, why is that? Well, one of the reasons for that, of course, not only is, we've got the demand side, but let's focus for a moment on the supply side. This is a big one. And one of those metrics where looking at national data, I think it makes sense because of the inbound relocation that we receive. And that's part of the reason why we are different from what you're going to read from a national real estate market perspective. We've got a lot going for us that plenty of places don't. And of course, one is significant, continuous inbound relocation. More people move here than move away from here. And so, nationally, if we just start there, we're starting the year with about 27% more homes on the market than the year before, and only 4% more sales, which obviously indicates that there's just a weaker supply and demand balance than there was a year ago. 36% of the homes on the market right now have taken at least one price reduction since listing that home for sale, which is another interesting statistic. And locally, we've seen price reductions increase, but not as much as you would anticipate because we've got more days on market. I mentioned a few shows ago the power in statistics, and stay with me for just a moment on this. I'd mentioned that if I were to tell you it takes 64% longer to sell your home now than it did this time last year, that would have a different impact on you than if I said simply, well, it's going to take about 3.5 weeks or so to sell your home now, as opposed to about 2 weeks this time last year. Oh, no big deal. But you hear 64% and it throws you for a loop. So with these statistics, you have to kind of dig into them like I do, which is I'm going to do that for you on these shows like I have for the past 13 years. And it's my pleasure to continue to provide you with this information. But I think that when demand is strong, we see more homes go under contract in January and February than in markets where demand isn't strong, right? So we saw in 2020 and 2021, those were two very hot markets, right? But the beginning of 2022 was when inventory was at its absolute lowest. We had about 1,000 homes available for purchase, not including, the ones you could build from scratch in a new construction community. But in spring of 2022 is when we really started to kind of recover some inventory. We went from 1,000 properties to a peak of about 3,400 properties late in 2024. And these are pre-owned homes, by the way. These are homes that you can buy now. And so we've got some interesting dynamics happening, and I want to break that down by county. And so I'm going to do that when we come back. We're going to take a short break. And then we're going to finish up this show and help you guys really understand what to anticipate this year in Charleston real estate. So stick around for more of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show right here on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com. Remember to check us out online, listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or give me a call or text, 843-800-0065. This section of the show is sponsored by Brian Wells of Coastal Creek Design. He's been on the show several times. Feel free to reach out to him, coastalcreekdesign.com. I want to finish our discussion here on what I think is going to happen in Charleston this year. And in order to do that, let me just help you guys understand a few more statistics. I know some of you guys, gosh, you'd rather watch paint dry. But I think there are also plenty of you that really appreciate the breakdown and the fact that I spend so much time really analyzing the market in different ways rather than just giving you some buzzworthy statistic and then create a show around that. So if we're looking at numbers for the Tri-County area, and we break that up into Berkeley County, Dorchester County, and Charleston County, I want to help you guys just understand the dynamics of each of those three markets really quickly. Okay, for Berkeley County, if I look at, and these are all for pre-owned homes, right? I'm not incorporating new construction into these statistics, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. Berkeley County, if we look at the number of homes for sale last year, that increased 36%, but the number of homes we put under contract was up 6%. Closings were down 9%, and that means that the month's supply of inventory was up 37%, meaning we had a fairly significant shift more toward a buyer's market than a seller's market in Berkeley County. Now, we're not there yet, but that's the trend. To an extent, the same thing happened in Dorchester County. You know, the number of homes available for sale increased by 19%. The ones that were going under contract, that increased by 12%. The closings were up 41%, but the month's supply of inventory was still up 20%. Lastly is Charleston County. Pre-owned homes for sale, they were up 27% compared to 2023. Properties going under contract, only up by 3%. Closings were up 13%, and the month's supply of inventory was up 21%. So the whole reason I mentioned that is this. As we're putting more homes on the market, the rate at which we are putting those homes under contract is not keeping pace. That's why our month supply of inventory has been trending toward a buyer's market. Now, again, we're not in a buyer's market yet. Technically, we would need about 6 months supply of inventory in order for us to be in a overwhelming, or I guess a balanced market, really. And most areas are, between 2 and 4. There are some that are higher that really are kind of more like a normal market or even to an extent a buyer's market. And that's why when I go through these statistics, it's important to differentiate, right? Because Charleston has a lot of different types of real estate, associated prices, dynamics, trends, so on and so forth. Now, we do see more and more buyers behaving as though we're in a buyer's market because properties are staying on the market for longer. We had talked a little earlier about, over 1/3 of all properties available for sale in the country right now have gone through at least one price adjustment. And as we see those days on market continue to trend upward, right, it taking longer for homes to sell, the question is, are values coming down, or do sellers just need to get more realistic with what they're charging for their house in order to get it sold? I personally still think that we have a lot of sellers and, frankly, a lot of agents that are playing the let's price it here and then come down game, but then they're not coming down soon enough, which is why the property is sitting on the market, which is why buyers begin to believe that not only is it overpriced, but maybe there's something else going on there, and they use it as an advantage to beat you up, as a negotiation tactic, as they should, which is why strategy associated with selling property is so important. But I told you that I didn't include new construction in those comps because look at this. For pre-owned homes, the month's supply of inventory went up 24% last year. But for new construction, it actually went down 18.5%. We need to fix the supply issue in order to bring normalcy and balance to the market. We're simply not building enough homes to compete with the demand that's out there in order to kind of balance the market, which is why prices went up. There's just not a lot of options out there. Part of the challenge with that, by the way, as somebody that I sell a lot of land, and I sell land all over the state, whether it's just an individual lot or a large parcel for development opportunity. I'll give you a perfect example. I've got one in Allendale right now that's 150 acres, would make a fantastic subdivision, but there are no utilities out there. You can't have sewer and public water. You have to do a septic system and a well. And if you're a builder, a medium and a large scale builder, you don't want to mess with that. It's too expensive. And they don't have plans to extend utilities out there for another 10 years at least. So that's part of the challenge is where do people go to build affordably to solve this inventory issue? Well, I do think that more homes will go on the market next year, whether it's people finally accepting interest rates. It's kind of the new normal for the time being, somewhere in probably the 6s. If we get lucky, by the end of the year, we'll be in the high 5s. We'll see. I mentioned that a lot of people with 2-1 rate buy downs that did some sort of interest rate incentive with a lender or with the seller on the buyer's behalf have now had their payments continuously adjust upward. They're uncomfortable with that. They anticipated the interest rate being lower now than it actually is, and they're probably going to need to sell, right? They've got the equity, but the payment's just killing them. You've got, of course, all your traditional need-based sales. You've got opportunistic sellers that realize the equity they've built likely won't rise at the same rate that it has in years past. And if they're going to move, let's take advantage of that now before there's even more inventory and the market starts to balance a little bit. I think you've got, for all these homes that are sitting on the market, these lingering sales, you've got a good buying opportunity if you're a buyer. But I think the last thing to mention is just the tax-based incentive. As the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 is likely extended, which that'll lower rates and give expanded cuts to personal income taxes and will hopefully lower capital gains tax, which could spark more investment and create some more inventory as a result. So I see some great things, ahead for the market this year. I think more people are going to be engaged in the market now that we've got the election behind us, now that we've got some certainty moving forward as to the direction of our country. But at the end of the day, a lot of people just need to go through that initial planning conversation. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. Here's how I would look at that if I were in your position. Let me give you some things to think about. And as it gets closer to the time that you're ready to do an actual transaction, you've got the information, we've made preparations, we've saved you money along the way. So if that's something I can help you with, feel free to give me a call. I'd love to earn your business. Again, several incentives that we're starting the year out with right now. So remember to ask us about those. In fact, we'll just mention it when we're on the phone. But 843-800-0065 is the number, 843-800-0065, or listingsincharleston.com is the website, listingsincharleston.com. You guys enjoy your weekend, and thanks for listening to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show right here on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA.
Join us for another edition of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 10. Find him online at listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or call him at 843-800-0065. That's 843-800-0065.